This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides, so head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more. Welcome to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven, and today I'm again on my own because I'm doing a mini-series on the Kaleidoscope Colourful Garden. I did the first of my palettes, which is luminous, and it is what it says on the tin really, which is as if light is shining through stained glass, and so they're luminous, and the colours there are very saturated, strong, jolly, orange, yellow, lime, along with purple into pink, red and blue. So this palette is very much kind of calmer, earthier, got quite a lot of brown mixed in with the colours, and that may make you think, oh, that doesn't appeal to me. This is actually my favourite palette in the world, the Velvet palette, because you want to wrap yourself in it. It's very enveloping, and I love a garden to be a haven, and I love to walk out into it and almost feel like I want to wrap myself in every one of the flowers because their texture is wonderful and their colour is rich and they are really not crisp and clean. They're more earthy but beautiful and resonate colour and sort of absorb it but also give it out in a beautiful way. And for me, this is my real heart palette. I'm a cosy girl and it's a very cosy palette. And what are the colours in this palette? Well, there are 6 again, and the colours are more subtle than the luminous palette. So the first is sort of nearly black. I mean, I was going to call it crimson black, but actually it really is nearly black. And obviously very few flowers are actually that sort of really true onyx colour. They've got more red in them than that, but they're darker than red wine, let's put it that way. And so there are lots of wonderful things in that colour, and I'll tell you about them in a minute. The second colour is sort of, it's a family, it's a range from crimson to carmine, and even going into magenta, so it's got a little bit of purple at one end of it, but it's mainly real red wine, port wine colour. And then a little bit of a range, as I say, going into sort of where it's more translucent. You know, it's kind of moving more towards scarlet, but not as far as scarlet, which is in the luminous palette. And then the next is coral to brick red. I think of this almost like blood orange to brick red. So it's really where it's not luminous orange like ballerina tulip. It's definitely got quite a bit more crimson mixed into it, which is why blood orange is perhaps a better description of it, really, all the way to brick red. And then we had yellow in luminous, but that was lemon yellow. This is gold. So this is absolutely where lemon yellow is mixed with a bit of crimson and a bit of brown to make a goldy colour. So it's very rich and sort of textural. And then there is the sort of brandy snap colour, so sort of ginger and caramel. And I think of these as sort of burnt sugar colours. And then the final is a bit of a range again. Purples and blues often are very difficult to isolate, like purples and pinks are. And you can look one time and put it in one palette and look the next time and you think, oh no, it should be in the other. So I've merged amethyst and indigo. And so amethyst is obviously at the purple end, but it's a very rich, saturated, not luminous purple. It's really kind of like cardinal velvet purple to indigo, which is that deep navy blue. And so those are the 6 colours. And then what are the families that most sort of reliably can give you those colours? The ones that we turn to in the garden here for this palette and for this area of the garden. Well, there are 8 that we turn to really regularly, and some of them overlap with the luminous palette because they're just such fantastic families of plants, but some don't. And the first that doesn't is polyanthus. So this is the primrose family, but it's particularly the sort of velvety, dark crimsony ones that I'm thinking of, or the gold-laced ones. And the brilliant thing about them, of course, is that they flower from, well, here, sometimes the end of February until the end of spring, so into early June, really. And then wallflowers also give you this sort of not only scent, but also rich, lovely colours. Like there's one called Covent Garden Red, there's one called Fire King, which is a deep burnt orange, so real blood orange. And then tulips, got to appear in all 4 palettes. Verbascums give you great golds, so they're really good. Roses can give you some lovely velvety colours. You know, classic is Tuscany Superb, isn't it? In deep crimson. But there are plenty of others going all the way to gold roses, which, I mean, I'm sure you will know things like Graham Thomas. And then petunias, a really important part of this palette. Tidal wave red velour is one of my favourite plants in the entire world. I've gone on a lot about in the past, but it's absolutely splendid. And so lots of petunias you can rely on to give you this rich velvet. Amaranth, so that hasn't appeared in the previous palette, the amaranth family, the Love Lies Bleeding family. And we grow one here called Red Army in large quantity for the latter part of the year, and it's wonderful. But we grow another called Coral Fountain. There are plenty. Dahlias, you know, they're just perfect for this velvet palette. There are just so many of them. Verone's Obsidian is crimson black, you know, really, really, really dark. My favourite dahlia that I discovered, not my favourite dahlia, my first ever dahlia called Rip City. Its brother called Ripples, which is the Ribena version of Rip City. There are so many in this palette. Amari Gold, which is really golden. So those are the families that you can rely on. Polyanthus, wallflowers, tulips, verbascums, and particularly those coppery ones like Helen Johnson, roses, petunias, amaranth, and dahlias. And then just back to thinking about the succession thing, again, that I've talked about really quite a lot already in this series, but you've got your black and white drawing, you've got your tracing paper overlaying it, and you've got the first layer of tracing paper is March and April, May and June, July and August, September and October. And so you're obviously relying on the polyanthus, wallflowers and tulips for March and April and into May, actually. And so there are plenty like gold lace polyanthus that I already mentioned, the erysimums I already mentioned. Tulips, you know, there are just so many wonderful ones. Probably one of my favourites in the crimson to sort of almost black is Palmyra, which is a double variety, very early and very long flowering. I adore Ridgedale, which has a sort of touch of mahogany in with the crimson. I'm crazy about the blood orange variety called Hermitage and Cairo. So those are all in the sort of blood orange range and are really splendid. So they will give you really fantastic tulips for the first season, as well as golds. Belleville is a great gold tulip. And then there are all those wonderful browns, mahogany browns. Dom Pedro, I've talked about, we did a whole episode on Dom Pedro. So that will give you the early part of the year, along with wallflowers, which I keep mentioning, and they are just really fantastic for this first part of the year. Then May, June, and into July, of course, you're going verbascums and roses, and we have a rose here in a really lovely deep, deep orange, which we have in the Oast Garden, which is called Warm Welcome, but there are plenty of rich, saturated roses. Hot chocolate is Josie's, one of her absolute favourite roses, and you can imagine what colour that is. It's sort of scarlet mixed with brown, and it's a really, really splendid variety. And then, you know, beautiful, beautiful purples, like we have one here called Timeless Purple, which flowers for ages and ages and is just such a good one. Verbascums, I already mentioned, Helen Johnson, etc. So you want those coppery ones. Petunias, Tidal Wave Red Velour, I've mentioned, but there are so many. The Tidal Wave series is particularly good. But also you want to look out for the Sophinias, the small flowered varieties, and they will flower. We absolutely every year have Petunia, Tidal Wave Red Velour and Flower for Chelsea. We overwinter them in the greenhouse, and they sometimes flower from April, and they will go on flowering until October. So they really, really are fantastic for container plants for, a good 4 or 5 months. The amaranths, I've already mentioned, they are really brilliant to go with your dahlias for the July and August, as well as September and October section of your year. And so with those, you should be pretty well covered. And there's one family that I just wanted, well, actually a couple of families I just wanted to add. For early in the year, the hellebores. So don't forget all those beautiful sort of slaty, blacky, crimson varieties like Double Ellen and Maestro and Merlin. I mean, they are just so useful as perennials for early in the year. And also don't forget antirrhinums for late in the year. So Liberty Crimson and lots of the oranges like Sonnet Orange is a lovely, lovely dark saturated orange. And in terms of dahlias, I mean, there are so many for late in the year. I adore, obviously, the dahlia that's named after me, Sarah Raven, which is crimson, and so absolutely key to this palette. Molly Raven, which is slightly pale around the petal edge, but still absolutely splendid. And perhaps one of my favourite dahlias of all for this palette, because it's such an unusual colour, which is ochre to caramel, which is called Skipper's Bronze. And that's a single, brilliant for pollinators, just utterly beautiful. We have it in something we call the Rusty Dahlia collection, because it's that amazing, unusual colour, which is sort of rusty tin roofs that you see. And I think there's a lot to recommend that kind of colour in a garden. It's so incredibly helpful as a very calm, but also very rich colour. So if you want velvet, you want to think about succession. And there's just one final thing to say, as well as getting your palette right with your sheets of paper and getting the succession going through from March until October. But the other is, this is the most wonderful, wonderful palette to just scatter a little bit as a calming influence through the luminous. And that is actually how we use it hugely here, because there's one word of warning with velvet, is it can get a little somber, and certainly in a dark corner, you want to avoid it. But what we find is through really bright areas of the garden with bright flowers, like the Oast Garden, if we put the Petunia Tidal Wave Red Velour or one of the crimson tulips like Ridgedale that I mentioned, or Dom Pedro, all the way through the Oast Garden into the Dutch yard, it sort of calms it down in a really beautiful way and stops the colours being manic. It provides a real leveler, a real kind of almost like having a glass of red wine. It just calms everything down. And that is exactly how we use this palette most in the garden, as well as giving us a sense of enclosure and being enwrapped and enclosed in the Dutch yard where we have our eating table most often. So that is how we use velvet, and how I hope you will use velvet in your own garden. Thanks so much for listening to Grow Cookie to Range, and the 5th of my mini series on colour palettes and non-velvet in particular. Next week I'm back on my own again, and I'm going to be doing the second from last one in the mini series, so episode 6 on the comforting palette. So the lovely sort of cafe au lait colours mixed with apricot and peach and smoky putty pink and all those soft, gentle cashmere colours. So join me then to hear which are the core plants and how to get a succession all the way from March until November, if that palette is your thing. See you then. You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.